Conservation. She received a master's in historic preservation at the University of Pennsylvania and undergraduate degrees in historic preservation and political science from the University of Mary Washington. Her graduate thesis was entitled Cleaning Methods for the Removal of Lime Wash and Painted Plaster Surface, Utilizing Ion Exchange Resins on the Interior Architectural Finishes of the Capilla de, I don't speak Spanish, I'm sorry. I'm not even going to attempt it. She has presented her work at the IIC 2010 Congress and at APT 2009. Caitlin.
Well, good morning. So I'm Caitlin Smith. I work for Cryolic Conservation, and my talk today is entitled Restoring the Lion's Roar, Documenting and Replicating Limestone Sculptures through Laser Scanning, 3D Modeling, and CNC Machining. I'll go ahead and say right off the bat, I'm not the digital expert in this case. I'm the conservation professional, so I was the liaison between our client and the digital team that we put together. So what you should get from this presentation is not that I'm going to wow you with our technical feats, but you'll get more of the process leading up to that, the discussions that we had with our client, what they needed, and the tools we thought that would best achieve those goals. So this presentation is a collaboration between Cryolic Conservation, Direct Dimensions, and the Digital Atelier. And I'm briefly going to touch on issues of data acquisition through 3D scanning, data management issues such as storage, and data applications such as 3D modeling and physical reconstruction. The authors of this presentation are myself, Scott Cryolic from Cryolic Conservation, Harry Abramson from Direct Dimensions, Glenn Woodburn from Direct Dimensions, and John Lash from the Digital Atelier. And I'll just point out that John Lash is here today, as is Joe Nicolai from Direct Dimensions, so I hope you'll direct any really technical questions towards them later in the day. So let me start out by introducing you to the Prudential Lions. In 2011, Cryolic Conservation was engaged by Beaver Electric Company to conserve the Branch Brook Park lions. The Prudential Lions were sculpted by Carl Bitter, who was a notable sculptor of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He's the man with the amazing mustache above. He was born in Vienna, Austria, and he immigrated to the US in 1889. He worked on a number of notable public sculptures from major architects, including Richard Morris Hunt and George B. Post. His private commissions are in a number of notable homes, including those of the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and the Rockefellers. Some of his most famous pieces you might be familiar with are the bronze gates of the Trinity Church in Manhattan, ornament for Hunt's administration building at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the decoration for Post-Wisconsin Capitol, and the Pomona Fountain in front of the New York's Plaza Hotel. He was director of sculpture at the Buffalo Pan American Exposition, the St. Louis World's Fair, the Panama Pacific Exposition, and was the president of the National Sculpture Society for a number of years. Now, the Prudential Lions are not Carl Bitter's most famous works, but in Newark, they are beloved. The Prudential Lions were originally installed over the doorway of the Prudential Insurance Company in Newark, New Jersey in 1901. They were inspired by the lion on the company's 20-year locket. They were meant to signify strength and being on guard. After the building was demolished in 1959, the lions were reinstalled in Branch Brook Park in Newark. The quote you're seeing here comes from the plaque that was presented upon their installation, and it notes that for more than half a century, this lion with its companion stood guard over the doorway of the first Prudential building. They have witnessed the growth of Newark from a town to a metropolis. And then for another 50 years, they sat in Branch Brook Park, where they soon became mascots for the park, and importantly for us, for the Park Alliance. Children played on them, vandals painted them. Finally, in 2011, the Park Alliance decided to revamp the area where the lions were installed, and that's when we became involved. So here are the lions as we first met them. They're carved limestone companion sculptures depicting seated male lions with a front paw on a sphere. They're approximately 7 feet tall and weigh about 2,900 pounds each. Before treatment, the limestone exhibited staining, biological growth, gypsum crust, graffiti, scratchiti, mechanical damage, spalling, and erosion of details. There were missing portions of their tails, teeth, claws, ears, manes, snouts, etc., etc. On top of all of this, to cover these conditions, at some point, someone decided to take as a maintenance intervention painting of the lions, which gives them sort of this mottled, tannish appearance that they have here. And it was these conditions that we were originally hired to address. Of course, what we didn't know when we got them was that under all that paint was a massive amount of graffiti, which I'll show later. Anyway, for our purposes, I'm going to briefly touch on the restoration and conservation efforts, because really what we're interested in here is the restoration process and the final product. But our conservation effort included treatments such as water misting, paint removal, poulticing, laser cleaning, Dutchman, and things of that nature. It was later that the project was expanded to include full-scale replicas of the lions. This shift came from a desire of our client to do more to protect the original fabric. And they had 4 goals in mind when they came to us with this. One, again, they wanted to preserve the original fabric, which was difficult in a place where the lions were so public, where they actively encouraged people to touch them and play on them. 2, they wanted to take advantage of their high visibility for promotional purposes. 3, like I said, they wanted to keep them highly accessible to the public, which is hard when you're trying to protect original fabric. But it was something that they highly valued. 4, they wanted to have an accurate record of the lions since they were going to remain out in the public and they were going to continue to deteriorate. They wanted to have a record of them as they were now. So with these goals in mind, we came up with several options for them. 1, we could simply restore the originals and help them come up with a plan to maintain them. 2, we could restore them and then make molds off of them. Or 3, we could go a step further. We could restore them and then we could laser scan them and create digital models. And clearly, the last one is the option they went with. And there were several reasons that they chose this option. In the past, these sculptures were subject to vandalism and wear and tear from park visitors, so some sort of documentation was necessary in their eyes. Creating molds from the original sculptures would have had similar results to 3D modeling. However, there were concerns about the storage and shelf life of rubber molds and the effect that mold making would have on the new repairs we had just installed. In contrast, laser scanning could be done in one day, it could be done in place, and it could be done without physically touching the sculptures at any time. 3D modeling from the scans would provide an accurate digital record that was accurate enough to negate the necessity for rubber molds at all. It would also give the client the opportunity to create replicas and miniatures from the 3D models and create them out of various materials for promotional purposes. And in fact, it was this capability that allowed the Alliance to go a step further than they had originally planned, to remove the original sculptures from the park, put them in a slightly safer location, and to put replicas into the park. So to complete this work, we put together a team of digital documentation professionals. We contacted Direct Dimensions for the laser scanning and 3D computer modeling, and the Digital Atelier for the CNC machining of foam, which was ultimately used to create molds off of and make precast concrete replicas. Oops, I skipped ahead of myself. So one other important consideration when we talked to them about laser scanning was when the scanning would take place and how many scans they wanted. There were discussions at first about doing scans of the original fabric as it was and also of the lions after they were fully restored. So we gave them 4 basic options for when the scanning could happen. 1, it could have happened before they moved the lions in case of a catastrophic event. The image you're seeing there is of when we moved the lions and they're flying through the air. There were concerns about that. The second time would have been to the point at which cleaning had already occurred, but no permanent physical alterations had been made to the lions. So we would have had an accurate record of the lions as they were, but it wouldn't have been an accurate record of the changes we made. 3, we could have done it after conservation and reconstruction had occurred, so it would have been at the very end of the process. Or fourthly, what we ended up doing was we could do the scanning after we had cleaned and after we reconstructed all the details that they really wanted in clay, and then we scanned them at that point so that 2 things could happen at the same time. We could continue working on the original sculptures, putting our repairs on, while at the same time the digital component was going on. The 3D models were being made, the CNC machining was happening, and the precast concrete replicas were made. So it was a bit of a time saver for us. This also had the advantage for our client of they actually wanted to have a sculptor involved. They could have had the lines scanned earlier, and we could have recreated the details in the digital model and used that, but instead they wanted to physically recreate the details with a sculptor to be able to touch them, to have some input, and to adjust them as needed. So that was their choice. So after they had looked at the clay models that we did, after they had adjusted them and approved them, we began the laser scanning process. So Direct Dimensions came to the conservation studio to laser scan the statues. They used a Surphaser 25HSX, a phase shift hemispherical 3D scanner. The scanner has a 360 degree by 270 degree field of view and a scan rate of up to 800,000 points per second. The scanner creates three-dimensional electronic images that are accurate up to 1 millimeter or better. The scanner collects point data to create polygonal computer models, or STL files in this case. The files were then taken by Direct Dimensions back to their studios, where a technician adjusted them for accuracy and to fix any gaps in the data. So scanning the statues after clay repairs allowed work on the 3D and foam models to continue simultaneously with the conservation work on the original statues, which for us included Jan mortar repairs, Dutchman repairs, and consolidation. In contrast, the mold making process would have had to have occurred either on the unrepaired original surfaces, or they would have had to have occurred on the newly patched surfaces, which we were concerned about protecting. So after laser scanning, the files were sent to the digital atelier, where a 5-axis CNC machine was used to mill full-scale replicas in 6-pound urethane foam. Cryolic Conservation then worked with the digital atelier on the construction of the foam form and the finishing of their surfaces. Each of the lions was created in 11 separate pieces of foam. After the pieces were glued together, the surfaces had to be reworked. As excellent as the technology is, there's still a need for artistic involvement in the process. And this is for 2 reasons. For one, the bits used to cut the hard foam aren't able to cut any deeper than they are wide. So the recesses and overhangs in the replicas weren't quite as deep as they would have been in the originals. In addition, the small bits used by the machine leave a regular groove pattern across the surface, and that needed to be carved back and minimized. So conservators and a sculptor worked together with the digital atelier staff to rework the entire surface of the lions and redefine the recesses. And then we did this work based off of historic documentation and our own documentation. So here you see the finished foam models, and you can see they were sent to Metropole Inc. to cast the pre-concrete replicas. You can see the molds going around the foam forms. And here you have the fruits of our labors. Here we went from 2 severely aged limestone sculptures to 4 fierce lions. This image is of the newly christened Pat. He was renamed for one of the donors to the park. On the left is Pat the original, and on the right is Pat the new and improved. So you have Pat version 1.0 and Pat version 2.0. Oops. Here you can see Pat and Art, newly christened after the donors, at home in the park, awaiting visitation. So what did this project represent for us? We believe it represented a case in which 3D documentation provided the best option for a conservation project. The advantages here proved greater than those for more traditional methods of documentation, including two-dimensional drawings, photographic documentation, and mold making. In our case, the benefits included those of physical storage because it eliminated the need for storing large rubber molds for an extended period of time. 2, it had the advantages of long-term storage. It was easier for our client to store a digital file than, again, to store large rubber molds. There was the relative ease of manipulation. In future, the files can be manipulated to make changes to the models, to make enlargements or miniatures, and to make castings in a variety of materials for promotional purposes, which they are very excited about. There was the benefit of accuracy, for getting the surface textures that they wanted to document, which is a little easier in 3D form than it is in a two-dimensional drawing. We wanted to protect the original fabric, particularly the porous weathered limestone. We also wanted to protect the new repairs. By scanning, we were able to allow our repairs to have more time to cure, and we had more time to make them. We were, however, aware of the disadvantages, and we had a lot of discussions with our client about these. There was the cost of the technology, though for them there was a trade-off between the cost of mold storage and the cost of digital file and foam creation. There are the costs of accuracy. If you want more accuracy, you have to pay for more accuracy. But for our client, they went for a little less accuracy in exchange for the involvement of an artist, and that was their choice. We're aware that several people have touched on this in their talks. The digital files have to be kept up to date. We have to keep up with the technology. And for our client, if they don't use it, they're probably going to lose it. There are issues of file size and storage. Our client may not have, doesn't normally work with files this large. There was a loss of detail on the replicas. One drawback to the scanning, the model making, the machining, and the reworking process is that there's a slight loss of details in each step. We lost the surface texture. We lost the eroded bedding planes of the originals. They're all minimized in the final product. So in the end, the replicas have a much smoother appearance than the originals. But in our case, our client was willing to accept some degree of change, because really what they wanted were not exact replicas of the originals. What they really wanted was a copy of what they thought the Lions would have looked like in 1901 when they were first installed on the Prudential buildings. So they were all right with a little bit of loss of detail. But this then relates to my last point, that the originals and the replicas are not the same. And you can see it best maybe in this image. Because of the timing of the scans, because we did the scanning in the middle of the process, the replica and the original aren't the same. In our case, the client was okay with that because, again, they wanted sort of the idealized version of the 1901 Lion, but then they wanted to protect the original fabric. And for us, for me, the advantage was this. It was that when we did the clay repairs, we were really aggressive. Every little detail on the mane, the ears, the nose, the eyes, every little thing that they wanted to give the character. They really wanted to restore the personality of the Lions. That was their wording. So we went really hard on that in the clay, and that's what was scanned. But in the originals, when we had them in our studio, when we went to repair them, the repairs had to stand up to a lot of use. They're going to be outside. They're going to be climbed on by visitors probably. So we were doing repairs in things like Jan repair mortar and limestone Dutchman. So to do that, of course, you have to cut away at original material to install the repairs, which always makes me a little nervous. I don't really like to lose original fabric, especially when you have some of those original sculpted details. So what we were able to do, because we had done something more aggressive in the clay, was when we went to repair the originals, we didn't take it quite as far. We didn't add quite as much material. And so we're okay with that difference. I am at peace with this decision. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me later or talk to John Lash or Joe Nicolai from Direct Dimensions. Thank you.